Good afternoon, and welcome to Jeff and the Rabbi. Passover.
Passover. Let's just pass over.
That's it. Passover.
That and move on to the next
thing. Next topic. Well, last night I'm thinking about Passover because I could do a lot of preparation for the show.
It's about time, yeah.
Well, I prepare myself for the show, and that's a good host does that. Mm-hmm. I got a little off topic, started drifting. Little ADD was coming in, and I started thinking about. In any good Jewish story, we always got a villain. We got a good villain. I don't know. Did you read comic books? I don't know if you were a comic book reader. Well, I used to read all the superheroes. Each one had their own specific villain.
Right.
There was Doctor Doom. There was this guy. Everyone a bad guy. So I'm thinking, and I know this is probably not where you're going with the conversation today, but I think a little side talk here could do. Who is the worst villain? You start off with a serpent walking around on two legs. He was a villain. Then you had Cain. Esau, you got Haman was a bad villain, and you go into the modern times with the Fuhrer, all these people like that, the Mufti.
Right.
I would say even I know other people would say maybe the President of the United States, occasionally, maybe like now.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah. And just knew it. And even, of course, for me, that kid in third grade who asked if my father was going to come pick me up in the Jew canoe, he's probably up there too. So if you take them and compare them to Pharaoh, obviously, all had an impact on the Jews. Where does Pharaoh rank as a villain?
So
villain.
Actually, since you brought that up, I think it's a really interesting thing. The comic books, and by the way, a lot of these comic book artists, Marvel and DC and all that, there are a lot of Jewish guys. But you notice, you pointed out that every superhero has his nemesis.
Yes.
Right? And isn't that just the way it is in life?
Absolutely.
In other words, you're a good guy and I'm a good guy, but we each have that one thing that takes us down.
Oh yeah.
So, in general, all very good, but I got that one, and so many times you'll see this guy's great guy, except he just, can't stay away from the women, or wonderful guy, just can't manage his money.
Me with midgets, have that same issue,
Right.
It's a problem.
So this guy can't manage his money, and this guy's got a drug problem, and this guy's, and certain things, everyone's got their one nemesis, give him a name, he's got some. So, actually, if you find that in Egypt, it was Pharaoh.
Right.
So Pharaoh was the nemesis. Okay. Pharaoh was chosen to be the perfect guy that would be the nemesis. That's why they went to Egypt. Guy could have taken him to Babylon, right?
I didn't know that.
Could have taken him to Babylon, and they could have been the Exodus of the Jews from Babylon. It could have been the Exodus of the Jews from Africa, or who knows where,
True.
They could have split some other sea, or who knows what. There's seas all over the place.
Lake Lanier.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. But
specifically Pharaoh. So what's the deal with Pharaoh? So Pharaoh was the one that when Moses comes to him and he says, I come representing God, the God of the heavens and the earth. So Pharaoh looks him up in his big book there. He's flipping through the pages. I don't see, where's the, I got my listing of gods here. Right. I don't see that one listed anywhere. See, Pharaoh was the one who was antithetically, totally, absolutely opposed to the idea of there being one God who was all-powerful.
Well, that makes sense. He was the Egyptian god. They have gods for everything.
Right.
He was a god.
And Pharaoh, if you take a look at the name, in English it's hard to see because these names don't really mean anything. Pharaoh. What's Pharaoh mean? Name of a horse or something, right?
I think that was one, yeah.
Yeah. So, but Pharaoh in Hebrew is really from the word Pei, Resh, Ayin, those three letters, Pei and Resh and Ayin. And that letter is parua, which means to be let loose, go wild, uncontrolled, unrestrained. Wow. And that was what it was all about. And really, that's where the Jewish people are at. The Jewish people are at living a life that is controlled, managed, restrained at points.
Just the opposite of
and Pharaoh's let it all hang out, just do it. However you want, when you want, where you want, with whom you want, how you want it, whatever, do it, right? And that's exactly why God put us in Egypt, because that was the big challenge. Can you go into Egypt, live in a Pharaoh type of society and still, come out of there and learn your lessons from there, and that makes you a better Jewish people.
Wow. So he was the antithesis of the Jews, and that makes sense.
He was,
He
absolutely.
was our big enemy then.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Good. I didn't want to get you sidetracked. I just wanted to bring that up because that was the question. Okay.
So, we're down there in Egypt,
Yep.
and we get out, and God says, when he says, take the sheep, slaughter it on the 14th, put the blood on the doorpost, around midnight, I'm going to take you out of here. And every year after that, when this same evening comes around, I want you to tell this story over and over and over again. And therefore, we have this commandment to communicate to our children what happened in Egypt. Right. Now, that is a tall order. It's really very difficult when the Torah tells you to do something like that. How do you really communicate it? If I would say to you, tell your life story over. Tell, what you're all about to your children. So, you'll tell it over, and then the next thing you know is a day later you go, I forgot to tell them the part about this, or emphasize that. That really wasn't the main thing. The main thing I should have emphasized was this. And then you feel like, I don't know. Or sometimes I don't even know where to begin. I don't know where to start. I was born in a log cabin. I mean, what do you?
Right.
What do you do, right? So the sages came along, the rabbis. The rabbis came along, and in the time of the Mishnah, let's say around 200 A.D., and the rabbis said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you an outline, how to tell this story. It's an outline, you'll embellish it as you see along the way, but here's an outline. And the outline is going to be governed by two fundamental rules, or a rule and a particular text. Okay? What's the rule? The rule is the story has to begin with degradation and embarrassment,
Right.
and it has to end with praise. That's the rule. Has to start bad and end
It's
good.
almost the opposite of like an evening out for me. I start real happy and oh God.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not good.
So here we want to start bad and
Right.
end good.
Gotcha.
That's a big challenge, but that's important. Like, why do I have to start bad and end good? Anytime I tell you any history, if I would say, like for example, let's say in 1948, a group of Jews fought with a group of Arabs and maintained and grabbed control of this small piece of land in the Middle East, which was formerly called Palestine, and they called it Israel. Okay, that's a pretty interesting story.
Right.
Very interesting, very nice. You can have your opinion. They're good guys, they're bad guys.
Right.
Now, if you should say, let's have a little context. This group of people, 6 years earlier, 3 years earlier,
Right.
but for the 5 years prior to that, they had been through a war where 6 million of them were killed. Oh, that's a little bit of a different.
That changes the story.
That's kind of an interesting perspective
Yeah.
to add to that story, doesn't it? It's a little bit of a different view.
Yep.
And a lot of these people had just arrived there from Europe, and they were basically poor, penniless, armorless, very few in number. Hardly anyone was really born in Israel. Like of all the people that were in Israel that were born, there was a small percentage. And okay, we got that. That really changes the story. Then I'll add the story actually, these people had lived in that piece of land 2,000 years earlier, but they had been exiled from there, and they really hadn't been back there for 2,000 years. And now they came back. Really? That's pretty interesting part of this. That's a fascinating background you're adding here. Oh, and by the way, there was this book, and this book had foretold that all that was going to. Oh, wow! It's like
Changes the whole story.
whole other movie now.
Right, yeah.
Now it's like this adventure tale about these people, the ancient people that were exiled, and it's a whole different story. So you have to understand the background, where people are coming from. That's why, when telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt, you have to understand our background, the background of the Jewish people.
Right.
Okay, and the background of the Jewish people is the same background that much of the world was in, which is idolatrous. The truth is we going all the way back to the times of Abraham. Abraham grew up in an idolatrous family.
Right.
He was doing the idols just like everyone else.
His father, his uncle.
Father, uncle, and the whole world. But Abraham decided to take a different path. And because he took that different path, he started on a sequence of events. Abraham, and he had a son named Isaac and Jacob,
Right.
and so on and so forth. They went down to Egypt and all this stuff. And all of a sudden now, his children are being taken out of Egypt, and they are now like God's chosen people. And God's doing an exodus for them and taking them to a promised land, which actually had been promised back to Abraham when he decided to make the break from being idolatrous. So now we're going, wow, this is phenomenal. You mean to tell me that this is where we started? Like, I can't believe it. This is like the classic, the guy says, we're celebrating the 100th year of our company. Oh, it's wonderful, 100 years of the company, yeah. Old great-grandpa Goldstein came over here, couldn't speak a word of English, saved up his pennies and bought himself a horse, right?
Yep,
and then he started pedaling around, going from town to town, and they did it, and and you're sitting there in the boardroom of the company and you're telling over the story. Hey, it's a lot different story now. So now I'm sitting here and I say, wow, this is not like the guy that was born with the silver spoon in his mouth, right? This is someone who built themselves up from nowhere, covered a lot of ground. This whole story is pretty special. That is the theme. Anyone that tells over about the Passover Seder, when you tell that story over, it has to start low, humble, very, very humble, and then show how it built to this tremendous greatness. So we got to the point where God's actually splitting the sea open for us.
That makes it interesting. By the way, you see, understand now why Rabbi Friedman's Seder goes about 4 hours and mine goes about 45 minutes. I'm already on my third cup of wine by now. You haven't even gotten into the story yet.
We didn't even say the Kiddush yet.
I'm on the third cup of wine. And
just getting everyone juiced up over here. Right.
This makes a big difference.
We have never found any, by us, we digress so much.
A lot of digressing.
So every now and then someone has to say, like, maybe we should get back to the Seder. It's like, oh, yeah, right, I forgot. Right. So that is number one. That's number one. Okay. So now, but still, how do I tell it over in a nice, terse way so I can communicate this? So this is where the rabbis came along and they said, there is a great place to find the whole story summed up, because otherwise you don't know like where to go, what to say, what to emphasize. So the rabbis said, you turn to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 26. Chapter 26. In chapter 26, there are 4 verses. Chapter 26, verse 5, 6, 7, and 8. Verse 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. 4 verses. Here's what happens. What's it doing in Deuteronomy? In Deuteronomy it says that when you move into Israel, you're going to have a farm. You're going to become farmers. You raise your crops. It says, you know what you need to do? Before you start to partake of your crop, you need to bring a gift to the temple. Every farmer should go out into his field. When he sees the first fruit budding on the tree, he should go tie a little red ribbon around it. And then later on, when those fruits ripen, he'll recognize where they are because they got a ribbon around them. He should collect a basket full of the first fruits and go to Jerusalem with his basket of fruit. He comes into the temple with his basket of first fruit. There's a Kohen there. He comes in, he gives the basket to the Kohen, and he makes the following declaration. So here it says in Deuteronomy, he comes to the Kohen that will be in those days, and he will say to him, I declare today before the Lord my God that I have come into the land that he swore that he was going to our fathers, that he was going to give to us. It says the Kohen then takes the basket from his hands and places it down in front of the altar before God. And then it says, he repeats after the Kohen, and he says, my ancestor was an Aramean tried to destroy my ancestors. We came down to Egypt and dwelt there few in number. We became there a great, powerful nation, very numerous. The Egyptians did bad to us, and they afflicted us, and they put hard labor upon us. We cried out to God, the God of our fathers. God listened to our voice, saw our abuse, our burden, and the pressure we were under. God took us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, and signs and wonders, and signs and wonders, and brought us to this place, the land flowing with milk and honey. That's it.
Quick story.
That's the whole story.
Well, that's why
now we can eat.
Now you see why my
Now we
is so
can
much shorter
eat.
than yours.
Now we can eat. All you got to do is to say that, because you're supposed to tell over the whole story. That's it, in 4 sentences.
I got this one. This one.
Now, if you take a look at your Haggadah,
Yep.
it's actually got those 4 sentences in there.
It does.
There's only one thing. After each phrase in the
gets about
sentence,
20
there's a
pages.
paragraph of elaboration.
Right.
But basically, all you're doing is saying those 4 sentences. And they elaborate on it, they explain it, you tell the whole story. So, for example, when you get there and you say the Egyptians abused us, well, then you got to
discuss that, right.
I got to get into it. How did they abuse us? What happened? When you say we became numerous and great, the Egyptians did bad to us. Each one of those phrases, we cried out to God. Each one of those phrases is very important, and it needs to be appreciated. But each one is a phrase, and each one tells us part of the story.
Right.
We came down there, and Aramean tried to destroy us. That means Laban tried to destroy Jacob.
Yep.
Had Laban destroyed Jacob, that would be the end of the story right there. We could have been gone, and there's no story. No Jeff and the Rabbi.
Now, that would really be bad.
Whoa. The world would never know what they were missing.
That would be a tough one right
Can you
there.
imagine? The world just wouldn't know. Then we went down to Egypt. How did we go down to Egypt? What was that all about? Well, there just happens to be it wasn't just like we said, well, where should we go? I've never been to Egypt. Let's go check out the Nile. I heard there's great Nile cruises. No, there's a little bit of a story behind that, right? And it needs to be elaborated. We dwelt there few in number. Yeah, we came down. There was only 70 of us before you know it. There were so many of us, the Egyptians didn't know what to do with us. Then the Egyptians were bad to us. How did that all happen? They abused us. What was that all about? They made us do hard labor. What's that all about? We cried out to God. You see, that's also a big part of it. God heard us. He saw our abuse and everything. God took us out of there. How did that all happen? Outstretched arms, signs, wonders, miracles, 10 plagues, all the stuff. So all of that is elaborate. So that the bulk of the story is, it starts with our degradation.
Right.
And it ends with our glory. And it is told in those 4 sentences, and that is your Seder in a nutshell.
So you got to say the right thing. It's just like you read it right from here.
Whoa. Unbelievable.
It might take a little while for some people to
Yeah,
get that one.
I caught it right away.
That really quick.
I've been working with him for a long time, so I pick up on these things a little quicker than most.
That was pretty good.
Okay.
So that's where you get it, though.
Yeah.
Right.
That's where the whole thing is. And the goal is, here's the goal. The goal is that when the story is done, everyone should go, wow, that was amazing, and wow, we are really fortunate. We are really fortunate.
So that's the ultimate goal of this.
That's right. Now, you might have kids sitting around a table, and the kids have known nothing but luxury all their lives.
Yep.
They were raised in free America, and they went to nice schools, and they always had plenty of clothes and food and vacations and trips and fun, and now they got their own cars, and they got everything they could possibly want.
Yep.
So to them, okay, what's with the story? So we got out of Egypt, So it's to them, and to each and every one of us, we have to all appreciate it didn't have to be this way.
Right?
It could have really been very, very different. And we are very, very fortunate that we find ourselves in this circumstance. Most especially that we find out that we got picked to be Jews. And it's a really good thing. Because, you could have been picked to be some other group, but who would have wanted to be that group?
No, this is a good story. And this one, this is like if you were going to make a movie, this would be a great story to make a movie about.
Right.
It's like, here was Cecil B. DeMille, whatever.
Right, if you were going to make a movie, and they have.
And they have.
Not once, not twice. But,
by the way, I did tell you, I did watch, I think we discussed this before, I watched, there was a new version of the Passover story that just came out last year. Might be the worst thing I've ever seen. It says nothing about what you just said right here. Literally had nothing to do with this.
No surprise?
It was definitely, it flopped, but it was pretty bad. Christian Bale did not make a good Moses here. The whole thing was a failure. But this story right there is your blueprint.
You got it. You got 4 sentences.
That's pretty good.
And that's it. And that's what that's the Haggadah. The bulk of the Haggadah follows it through. And then the beginning of the story, there is another group of sentences that's taken from the book of Joshua that similarly tell over the story of the Jewish people in a very terse form. And now you've told the story.
What are the 3 points you have to make? I know.
Then along comes Rabbi Gamliel.
Yes.
And Rabbi Gamliel says, in the story you have to mention Pesach, which means that God skipped over, because that was pretty amazing. Yeah. Of the whole story, the most amazing part is there's a plague everywhere.
Yep.
And certain houses are skipped over.
That's how we got the name for the whole holiday, right?
You got it.
Right.
That's why they call it the holiday of skip over.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all got, skipped over.
Right.
And no one could figure out why, except the Jews knew why, the ones that did it. They put the blood in the doorpost. Now, what kind of disease skips over houses that have blood on their doorpost?
Sounds almost miraculous to me.
Like, what's that all about? So that's pretty amazing. And then matzah. What's matzah? Matzah is all about that it happened suddenly, right? Because that's what matzah is all about. There's no time for the bread to rise. So the matzah is that all this happened after all these years were there. All of a sudden they end up leaving in a hurry. Even they had so much time to prepare. But when it happens in a flash, because God can make things happen in a flash.
Right.
And the third one is morar, bitterness. Right. That there's bitterness. And the truth is, there is bitterness. Anyone that knows, anyone that trains to be an Olympic athlete, or anyone that works out, or anyone that's tried to build up a business, anyone that's built anything that's worthwhile, there was bitterness along the way.
No pain, no gain.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Absolutely. Some guy from Alabama, I think, said that.
It was.
An Alabama guy, I think.
Those good coaches with a hat.
Right.
Remember that, yeah.
So the idea is that there's bitterness. And the bitterness, the reason why this is so special and so glorious and such a celebration is because there was bitterness along the way. There was bitterness, there was miracles, and it all happened in a flash.
All of our stories have bitterness, I've noticed that, and then bam. So
right.
It works out
That's
great.
That's right. And that's an old adage that we have. The salvation of God can come in the blink of an eye.
We gotta be ready.
Any second you could be here, and the next second God says, hey, we got something in plan. In store. Let's go.
That's pretty good. So my question is now, what do you do night 2? You just did this. Now what are you going to do this second night of Passover?
Sometimes you have to hold back a little bit.
Hold back.
Yeah,
so you got a lot more information now, because I've got to tell you.
Or you have different guests the second night, and then you can do all the same stuff as the previous night.
And they're impressed just as much as the first guest.
Right. Or if things really get bad, then you move to Israel and they only do one night.
That might be a better idea.
Yeah.
I can't even do one show. You got 2 shows, and I can't even do one. It's tough for me.
Right.
My Seder. But no, this is impressive stuff.
Yeah.
So again, the whole coverage thing here is if you get the points here, obviously in Deuteronomy, and then those 3 points you cover, the story of our enslavement, the matzah, and what was it?
And the morar. The enslavement is the morar.
Oh.
The matzah is the sudden exodus, and the Pesach that he skipped over the houses in miraculous fashion.
Right.
Those 3 things pretty much tell the whole story. Enslavement, freedom, and it happened suddenly.
So where's the gefilte fish coming?
Yeah. And the eggs and all kinds of wonderful stuff, which is all really good and fine and dandy. And the truth is, if you want to talk about it during the meal, you certainly can. So if you want to move at a faster pace through the story so that people are more likely to be more talkative because they got a little food inside of them. You can do that. You can absolutely do that.
Yeah, we usually lose our audience right about when the meal comes out. Hard to get them to come back after the meal.
See, it's too bad. It's too bad because after the meal is all the celebration.
Right.
See, the whole story leads up to the meal. After the meal, it's just singing praises of God and enjoying and happy, just ecstatic about how things turned out. That's really the fun part. As after the meal is really the fun part.
I'll bring that up to my kids this year and see if they know.
It's all the singing. It's just all the singing and the happy stuff.
We do that every night at our house, though. So we get together. We get together and
Get
sing.
together, sing songs,
We do.
dance.
That's a typical night at the Goldstein farm. That's what
Yeah.
we do. Good stuff. This is Passover.
Okay.
Yeah, this, okay, this is going to help me a little bit on my Seder. I got some good stuff out of this.
Okay.
Not bad.
And, we got one more chance. So next week we'll do some more of this. Maybe we'll get a little bit more into the symbol. There's lots of symbols at this Seder, and they were all meant to convey different things. Maybe we'll get into that next time.
Perfect. All right. Next week, we'll be back.